These flyers note the association of the United States military. The soldiers, killers of the Jesuits, and thousands of other civilian innocents were trained at the U.S. Army School of the Americas at Fort Benning, Georgia. Fort Benning is full of ROTC trained officers. My name is Jack Gilroy, and I'm with Friends of Franz and Ben, and we're at the University of Scranton. It's 28 years ago today, Jesuits were murdered in El Salvador, and so we're going up to try to let students know that there is a connection between having ROTC on campus, because the U.S. military trained the killers at the assassination in El Salvador, and Jesuits died at the hands of individuals who were trained at the U.S. Army School of the Americas. We don't know how things are going to work, because we're told we were not wanted on campus because we were not invited by the students. So we're just going to give it a try and see what happens. So stay tuned. Thanks. This video is supported by Friends of Franz and Ben, courageous Catholics, wanted Catholic American who in World War I refused to train to kill his fellow man and woman. Ben Salmon of Denver, Colorado was imprisoned and sentenced to 25 years of hard labor. He died a young man as a result of prison and punishment. And in World War II, the Austrian peasant, Franz Jägenstätter of St. Radigan, refused to fight for the Nazis. Refusing, he was put on trial and beheaded. The Vatican declared Franz to be Blessed Franz Jägenstätter in 2007.
Father, thank you for this, but I do find it a little disrespectful. I have family who fought in the war, and I think they're great, and I respect them so much. And
Would you mind saying that on camera for us?
yeah, absolutely. I think.
So you're not interested in this protest against the U.S. military because you have family.
Yeah, I have my uncle, my cousin. They were both in the Marines. Both my grandfathers fought in the war in World War II. My one grandfather was on Normandy, on the beach in Normandy. So I have nothing but respect for them. I have friends in ROTC here, and I think that they're doing a great service to their country.
If they were to go to Central America to teach Latinos in methods of assassination, would you think that would be a good thing?
No, I don't.
Do you know that 28 years ago today, the assassins actually were trained by the United States military?
Did you have permission to be here, sir?
No. And not only that, but there were virtually thousands of individuals who were assassinated throughout Central America. This is Father Survil here, missionary. He spent many years in El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, but yet that is the service that we are talking about, but not military service.
I believe
he was working with the poor.
Still, missionary work is amazing.
She's very proud, and we understand that, because as you can see, I'm also
you're a veteran. Thank you for your service.
No, don't thank me for my service, because I'm not proud of yes, based on lies. The whole thing is based on lies, so I don't like to be thanked. But Father, could you say anything about the young woman? Understandably, is very proud of her relatives who have been in the military, but aren't we talking about something else here too?
Oh yeah. I was pastor in Nicaragua in the 80s when I was presiding at the funeral of young men who were killed with American lead in their bodies by counter-revolutionaries trained by the United States of America. And my parishioners there asked me, Father Bernardo, ¿por qué están matando a nuestra gente? Why are you Americans sending guns and ammunition to kill our people? That's a good question to answer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and at that time, for sure, some of the officers doing the training of these counters over outdoors were ROTC graduates from different Catholic universities.
Yeah. Did you ever hear the School of Americas? I think it could change where we are today.
But Father, did the bishops ever contact you and say, preach at Sunday Mass and tell the truth to the people?
No.
I wonder why. Yeah. So, I mean, this is where I think we've got to consider having an open mind to war. And when it's the Iraq War, for example, 2 million people displaced, right? 500,000, one of the conservative estimates, of people who were killed, Iraqi people.
Start reading it, praying about it, and living.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thanks for stopping.
Thank you.
Spend the dialogue with you.
Yeah,
In class, be sure to ask your professor about just war. Ask what wars he believed were just.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Jack. Tony.
Hey, Tony.
Hey, this guy wants to get a picture. Look, we're shy. We love your shyness, and come on over.
You don't have to do it. I have a question. Can you tell me your platform in 2 sentences?
I tell you what.
What's your argument? Yeah.
Argument here. This is the 28th anniversary of the assassination of the Jesuits in El Salvador. They were killed by the military of El Salvador, trained at the U.S. Army School of the Americas. This is a Jesuit university. There's 17 Jesuit universities in the United States that train their young people how to kill. Jesuit campus. Shut it down. Get rid of ROTC.
Thank you very much.
I was on that committee.
Some of us who have gone to prison, such as Father Bernie, who was kidnapped in Central America by the banditos. So we're going to take a walk down to the rector and see if he'll come out. We'll knock on his door and see if he'll come out and speak to us, okay? Maybe he has some of the answers to what we're talking about here now. Okay, see you down there.
Great. You're good, Jack. Oh, Jack is good. Yeah. Did you get the
I used to do this for a living.
Soldier, would you interview for a minute? Soldier?
Oh, that would be, a great idea.
The Jesuits were assassinated by U.S. trained military. There is a connection. ROTC must get out of here. ROTC must leave Scranton.
Hey, there's our police friends over there. You want to get a picture of them?
28 years ago today, the Jesuits, their cook, and their 15-year-old daughter were assassinated by men trained by the U.S. military. But that was only one of tens of thousands of individuals assassinated throughout Latin America. The University of Scranton is nervous about us being here today because ROTC is part of the whole system. You must work to get rid of ROTC. It does not belong on any Jesuit campus. Today there are 9 Jesuit campuses from Santa Clara, California to Fordham to the University of Scranton who are trying to bring to mind that ROTC is part of the system, part of the killing system of the United States government. All professors shot in the head by individuals trained by the United States Army School of the Americas. The United States Army School of the Americas has changed its name. It was known as SOA. We called it School of Assassins. So they changed the name to Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation. Very clever way, but we know that they are still training and still teaching people in psychological and neutralization, which is the code word for assassination. You are part of a Jesuit system, 17 colleges throughout the United States still having ROTC. Talk it up in class. Talk to your professors. Ask them what it's about. Ask them if it's a just war. If the young soldier coming down the street here would like to chat with us, we'd love to hear from you.
Nothing against you personally, soldier.
The same military that houses ROTC on 17 Jesuit campuses. Ask your professors to begin to speak up, to have some courage, to have some guts to say, ROTC does not belong on a Catholic Christian Jesuit campus. Talk up ROTC out. If you want to have a a group to do something, ask them to change to a reserve officers training team for rescue purposes. There are many good reasons where they could be traveling around the world doing positive things, not going to foreign countries to meet their people and kill them.
Don't worry about the fact.
We're walking to deliver our letter to the Jesuit rector of the University of Scranton and perhaps maybe speak to him as well.
Come on, we're just going to knock on the door. Wait. Yeah, by all means.
Thank you. Picture drop.
Oh, Margaret's Grove. This is Margaret's Grove we are. Oh, wow. Yeah. Did he say he was you think he was a Jesuit priest? Yeah.
Note the 8 trees, symbolizing 6 Jesuits, their housekeeper and 15-year-old daughter. We shall return next year, November 16, 2018. Father Bernie, I just wanted to ask you a few questions. Since my first question is, the ROTC seems not to be your choice activity for young Americans, especially Catholic Americans. And why is that?
Well, I went to a Catholic college seminary, and then for my theology also the Seminary of St. Mary's in Baltimore, where we who are preparing for the priesthood were expected to get a good command of what Scripture, both Old and New Testament, tells us is the message of Jesus, which has been the message of our Catholic Church for over 2,000 years. And I learned early on that Jesus did not encourage taking up the sword. We know the Scripture quotes about that. He discouraged even Peter from taking up the sword. And now we find that Catholic institutions, whether it's the University of Scranton run by the Jesuits, or Georgetown University in Washington run by the Jesuits, St. Francis University in Western Pennsylvania run by the TOR Franciscans, St. Bonaventure University run by the Friars of the Holy Name Province in my hometown of Olean, all have ROTC units on their campus. And I don't understand it. What does that have to do with evangelization? I have just a hard time seeing that. That's why I joined several people at the campus of the University of Scranton a few days ago to ask the leadership there, the Jesuit leadership, why? How does that fit into? And we had a hook. We had something special, a special way to raise that question. And that is because the Jesuits there have a memorial to the 6 Jesuits killed on the campus of their Catholic University, the UCA, as it's called, in San Salvador. Well, I spent about 2 years working with the church in El Salvador, in San Salvador, and I visited that campus. And as recently as last May, I went there with 2 university students from Carleton University in Pittsburgh to the chapel where those 6 Jesuits are interred. And one of those Jesuits, a very famous Jesuit, Ignacio Ellacuría, a Spaniard, but who spent most of his life in El Salvador, was one of those killed. And he told, when asked what he thought about the Georgetown University offering ROTC on that campus, what he thought, he said, tell my fellow Jesuits that that's a sin to train soldiers on their campus. So I felt very close. I say I was right there in El Salvador working in the barrio. I was expelled from El Salvador, and the Jesuits up there, including Ellacuría, were doing the best they could to object to what was going on. So I feel close to that question. Thanks for asking that question. You're the editor.
All right, Father. The next question is, why would you suggest young American Catholics not be patriotic and defend their country?
Well, I would have to challenge that question. I think you can be patriotic and not take up a gun to defend your country. I would say we all have to be patriotic, have a certain degree of love for our country, our church, our country, our family, and so on, the institutions that make us who we are. So yes, I say there's a room for patriotism. But unfortunately, patriotism has been reduced to the willingness to take up a gun and use that gun and kill to be called a patriot. I found out recently that the Knights of Columbus in the United States have different degrees of knighthood. And the highest degree has traditionally been called the 4th degree. They call themselves the 4th degree knights. Quite recently, though, they dropped that term, 4th degree, and now they're calling themselves patriotic knights. Patriotic knights. And why is that? Because only 4th degree knights or patriotic knights can carry their sword in their ceremonies. When they're dressed in their traditional garb, then they have their swords, often to accompany or to welcome a bishop to a church for confirmation or different special events. The bishop walks under their protective swords. Well, that's all part of a distorted idea of patriotism. Thank you.
Central American experience and how you were able to survive that and be here still.
Well, only for the grace of God, I guess I was allowed to survive to continue to tell the story, which is grown old, because here we are now in the 21st century, and this all took place in 1970s and 80s and 90s. But there's lessons to be learned from it, and that's why I'm willing to tell the story again and again and relate it to what's going on. Let us take the example of in those times, the United States had such a presence in Central America, which was not only diplomatic, but was military. Even in those days, Washington was training military officers at the School of the Americas, at that time located in the Panama Canal Zone, and had such an influence over what happened there. I don't know if you recall, but in the late 60s, there was the famous soccer war between El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras. Well, after that war was over, the military advisors who had been advising the two countries' armies, the U.S. was advising the Salvadoran troops, and other American advisors were advising the Honduran troops. Over 3,000 Central Americans died, as the United States basically used it as a military exercise. Yeah, I found out those details because when I was there, I went over to Honduras and had lunch with some Franciscan priests who have a parish right near the border on the Honduran side. And they said, after the war was over, the two advisor groups got together at their rectory and basically did a summary of how it went, sort of a debriefing of this war where 3,000 people died. So I have so many anecdotes from my experiences there, of my some 25 years in Central America that I could go on and on. But that's just a short example of how that affects me.
And how did you manage to survive? You were kidnapped?
Oh, how did I manage to?
Yeah, you were kidnapped at what point and what year?
Mm-hmm. Again, there's so much that could go into that, but very specifically, my friend, Father Larry, a Marino priest, invited me up to his town where he was serving as assistant pastor to a Salvadoran priest who was very strong against the repression that was going on at that time by his own countrymen, the army and the military. And Father Larry invited me up with my camera. At that time I had a nice Nikon camera to take pictures of the paintings on the rectory, which was in the town plaza, the center of town. Muerte a los sacerdotes comunistas, death to the communist priest, which was directed at the Salvadoran priest who was preaching what he was, the truth. So I got up there with my camera and I was taking pictures, and along come the police who wanted to know what I was doing. I said, I'm a tourist taking these pictures. He said, well, come with us. The mayor would like to see talk with you. So I went down, a woman, the mayor, she knew everything who I was and everything. She said, you're going to take a little trip. And so I had to go into this military vehicle to the headquarters of the National Guard in San Salvador. I was taken in there. And as soon as I stepped in the door, they grabbed from behind, blindfolded me, and took me out to the outside, threw me on the floor, and I thought they would start kicking and everything else. So, you go into fetal position and do the best you can and say your prayers. Well, after they did mocking and all that stuff, never touched me physically. It's more psychological. They did fingerprinting and all that, and then handcuffed me hands and feet to a bed, and during the night I was there. And again, the mockery continued through the night. Next day, still blindfolded, I was given I was stripped too, given my clothes and put in the vehicle and driven around. I knew the city, but where we were going, I didn't know. Finally, when we got to a place, blindfolded off, and I was at the immigration office. So I had to go in and go before the immigration director, and he says, you're accused of violating Salvador law, and please sign this statement. Well, at the same time I noticed there was this obvious American there, and I said, who are you, sir? He said, I'm the consul from the U.S. Embassy. I said, oh, thank God, thank God. He said, hey, sign this thing. I want to get out of here. I got stuff to do. I said, what is written there is not true. I can't sign it. I didn't violate any laws. And he said, oh, come on. I refused. So the immigration director gave me back my passport, which he had taken off me someplace along the line, and we left in the ambassador's car. I went to my house, but as I was going into my house, I was renting from an old woman in San Salvador, about to step inside in a poor neighborhood. A guy was sitting nearby on the curb, and another drunk, I thought. And he said, ¿Quién es usted? Who are you? And I said, soy Padre Bernardo. And so he said, "Es Padre Bernardo." I said, "You don't have to, I can hear you." And but then I noticed a van parked nearby, lights come on, and it comes up towards us. So I saw what was happening, because this Colombian priest had just been kidnapped in much the same way days before. So I tried to get into the house. The drunk, so-called drunk, held me. Car gets there, guy jumps out, got in the ribs, and forced me into the van face down. And we drove right to the border with Guatemala. And there, I told them, well, you've got my passport. We're going to Guatemala. I have a visa multiple, meaning I can enter legally anytime I want to. He said, we'll take care of it. Anyways, they come out, we drive into this country, just a kilometer, another vehicle, get out, a Mercedes-Benz. I was forced into the back between two guys with rifles. I thought, oh, this is it, this is it. Nobody said anything as we drove through the night. Finally we stopped, I get out, a Jeep, you have to get in that Jeep there. And I said, well, that's the firing squad. So as I got in, I tried to say to the driver, buenas noches, señora, mucho gusto conocerle, good to see you, sir. And when I said, I soy Padre Bernardo, another voice said, Bernardo, it was the Colombian priest who had been kidnapped. We were both taken and incarcerated in Guatemala City. Next day, accused of having entered Guatemala illegally, which tells the story of why I'm so sympathetic to illegal aliens. Have been accused of the same myself. Anyway, it's a long story. Basically, we were both deported from Guatemala City there. So I survived that experience, but it leaves an influence on me, you know, and it has stayed me with a long time. I was similarly deported from Nicaragua when I was reassigned to work in Nicaragua by the dictator Somoza. And when I was exported from there, I went to Honduras to live with the Jesuits in Tegucigalpa. But once again, I was picked up there and deported from there also and sent back to the States. But always surviving, that's the thing. And of course, that's because I was an American. That's when they were killing Guatemalan priests, El Salvadoran priests, not only the Jesuits, but the IASIS and so on. So yeah, I can thank my U.S. citizenship. But remember, those 4 American nuns in December of 1980 did not have the same positive outcome. They were killed. Yeah.
And how old were you when this was happening, these deportations?
Yeah, mid-30s.
Mid-30s, you were a young man.
Uh-huh.
And then how did it affect you? You say you still carry it. What did it do to you on an emotional,
It makes it
mental?
less trusting, more fruitful. When I was deported from Nicaragua, I went to Costa Rica and was allowed to function as a priest there in Puerto Limon along the Caribbean coast. But I would go up to San Jose frequently to pick up the Nicaraguan paper, which was brought in daily and sold on the street there in downtown. And many of the deportees from Nicaragua at that time, political deportees, would pick up their copy. But there was a camera there all the time, people there in the background. So all of us were well fichado, is the word in Spanish. They knew we were around, and they were recording what we were doing and all of that. So it makes you nervous, knowing that you're being followed and observed, surveilled, and that kind of thing. In Costa Rica, of course, they have a different tradition, but the U.S. influence at that time was very strong also. Once, when I was traveling to the States, they detained me at the airport there, an American citizen flying from San Jose to the United States. They detained me because there was such pressure from the U.S. Embassy. They were afraid I was coming up to the States to tell stories, of course, which I was doing. And the State Department at that time was doing everything it could to keep the American people misinformed. Mm-hmm. However, let me tell you that there's no longer those psychological scars. I returned to Central America now. I walk the same streets as I did last May of San Salvador. It's the maras, the street gangs, that are the dangerous elements. But their violence is directed at their own people, not at tourists. So I will even walk the streets at night in San Salvador these days, downtown, you know, the well-lighted streets.
What did it do for your faith, your personal faith, to go through some of that stuff?
Well, if anything, it's strengthened it, all right. Because in Central America in those days, less so today, there are so many people who have such a strong faith in their Christian faith and even in their non-Christian faith who believe that you have to work for liberation of yourselves and for other people. You're surrounded by what we use the term a cloud of witnesses. I say just so many. And they would include lay people, you include the clergy. I knew any number of the priests who have been killed there, both in Guatemala and El Salvador. So yeah, it's a great experience to fortify your faith, to be in a situation of persecution. It doesn't undermine it, it strengthens it.